Jolera interview series. I'm your host, Paolo, Nibletto, the Chief Channel Business for Jolera. This series features prominent IT executives from the IT industry talking about technology, innovation, leadership, and the marketplace. And today, we have a real superstar of the IT industry in Tiffani Bova. I call her a superstar because she's done everything imaginable and continues to influence the channel and the as-a-service market as we speak. She's currently the Global Customer Growth Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce and a best-selling author of Growth IQ, Get Smarter About Choices That Will Make or Break Your Business. Over the course of her career, Tiffani became the VP and Distinguished Analyst at Gartner and was the Channel Chief at Gateway Computers. I believe Bo was one of the first female channel chiefs in the computer industry. And I have to say about her keynote addresses, folks, they are standing room only affairs. She has presented to audiences in 6 continents, and I'm sure, Tiffani, the keynote in Antarctica is on your schedule somewhere. And I also like to include the event that I started, Women of the IT Channel in Canada. She was our inaugural guest speaker there and made me look like a genius, which is very hard to do, just ask my wife. Recently, Tiffani was named to the Thinkers 50 list of the world's top management thinkers. And we're going to talk about all of this and more today with Tiffani Bova. So please welcome Tiffani.
Hey, Paul, it's so great to see you, my friend. It's been too long. I wish it was in person, but still nice to see you on the other side of the screen.
That's right. Let's hope it's for 2021.
Yes.
Tiffani, you've been now at Salesforce for 4.5 years now. How has the as-a-service market evolved in your view in that time, and where do you see it heading?
Well, I would have answered this differently February of 2020 than I'd answer it today.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I would say that what has been really amazing out of such a terrible crisis that we're facing on a global level is the continued acceleration towards moving towards more digital. And as a service is one of those pieces, right? Whether it's software as a service, infrastructure as a service, everything you can get as a service from a technology standpoint. Where it used to be a nice to have, many vendors were talking hybrid and how do you get into, having a little bit of on-prem and off-prem, but it was really driven by cost management and trying to, modernize a data center. And now we've really seen the as-a-service market crack into that front office, meaning those customer-facing resources like sales and marketing and customer service, using as-a-service technology and really cloud in general and digital in really incredible ways, especially in light of everything that's going on.
So do you think COVID, the pandemic, was an impetus for this, or do you think it was going to be there anyways?
Well, as you mentioned, in my prior life, right, I was a research fellow at Gartner, and we'd been talking about all companies were going to become IT companies 10 years ago. And then we were talking about bimodal IT, which was this concept of on and off premise and running in 2 modalities and digitizing the back office, because best in class companies were running, 72, I'm doing this from memory, but it was like 72% of their budget on keeping the lights on, very little on innovation. And this was a decade ago. And so fast forward, you have a black swan event that hits in the form of COVID-19. And you see all of a sudden this acceleration of digitizing the back office to really help people work from anywhere and continue to service their customers and modernize supply chains and all the things that kind of were very challenged. So I would say that, do I think that COVID was the ultimate catalyst for those businesses who had not yet made investments? I think so. But those that were on their journey and maybe were on a slower pace, that acceleration we are definitely seeing in our research over the last 60 days on seeing people saying that it has accelerated over last year because of what's happened with the pandemic.
Incredible. So I mentioned you were named to the Thinkers 50 list. Before I ask my question, does that come with a replica statue of Rodin's The Thinker,
This one?
Oh my God, it does. It does.
So I got this. This is the Gartner Research 2013 Thought Leadership Award. Okay.
Right.
All right. So then I have hanging on it I have hanging on it my Thinkers 50 badge. So,
okay.
you know, it's kind of the combination of the two, but here's what I'd say. I was 50 on the list, so really glad I wasn't 51. I'll take it.
Yeah.
But it was a bucket list item for me, and it really has just been spectacular.
Fantastic. Well, you definitely deserve it. But on this thought about thinking, with the pandemic, I know we just talked about that, and the potential of another lockdown with all the second wave coming and everything else that's occurring in the marketplace. What should managers and entrepreneurs be thinking about doing right now?
So we just did at Salesforce some amazing research, which is available to everybody, free to play with. Tableau has actually sliced and diced the data. It's incredible about the future of work and what it looks like. The number one thing is health and safety and well-being of employees. That's sort of like from a global basis, US and international. Secondarily is how do you provide people the tools and capabilities to actually do their job? And the third is just really around making sure that they're staying connected with customers. And so that is sort of this big wrapper of future of work. And it's slightly different by region, by geo, by industry, by size, of course. But I would tell you that I think so many businesses now are trying to figure out how do we keep our doors open, keep commerce happening while we keep our people safe. So I'm going to back up a little bit. We did something in May along with Deloitte, and it was what are people thinking about and how can we help compartmentalize getting sort of people to understand what should they be doing. We found three things. One was stabilize the business. So depending on where you are in the world, sometimes you're going to go in lockdown, come out of lockdown, go back in lockdown. So that's stabilize. The second was get back to the office. In some cases, get back to work. The third one was get back to growth. And what we recommended for business leaders, entrepreneurs, leaders of groups or teams is to put people in charge of each one of those tracks from different parts of the company. So no matter what, the stabilized team is always working on, we're bringing people back to the office. We got to send people back out, that they have that all sort of handled. The second is, getting back to the office. What does that look like? And then the third, that being back to growth. What's the right, remember in the May timeframe, what's the right tone? Should we still be selling? Are people buying? Like, I don't want to be insensitive to what's going on, right? So ultimately, it was a great way for us to frame conversations. So I would say whatever 3 or 4 for you will help you keep your people sort of aligned to what they're responsible for doing, and then participating in making sure that you're aligned to what your employees and your customers need. But first and foremost, it's been really amazing to see how quickly everyone rallied around the employees to make sure that they were taken care of.
Yeah, no, that was really cool. Let me ask you, in your estimation, because everyone's talking about these born in the cloud partners and customers out there, but how do you think the channel and the whole industry as a whole has handled the born in the cloud customer?
The born in the cloud customer?
Yeah.
So I'd say this, for me, it was a term that, as you know, I started using many, many years ago. And it was really for those businesses that didn't have legacy infrastructure or bad habits. And so today, I think leaders have a decision to make. Do they go back to the status quo, which is sort of a look back of where we were in 17, 18, 19, to your original question, the pace of innovation and digital transformation and all those things? Or do we look forward and say, do we take this time to reset and understand what could we be doing to compete differently with potentially these new startups and born in the cloud brands, which happen to be a lot more agile and responsive because they're as a service or cloud-based. And so it's an opportunity for legacy businesses who have been around, more than 15 or 20 years that have already started to modernize. As I said, do we rapidly, continue to go down that path? But I'd say the first question I always ask when I'm in front of a customer is, if you could start your business Monday morning, knowing everything you know with the situation we're in, what would you do? And then how do you get yourself from where you are to what you would do if you had the opportunity? And that gap is what you should focus on closing. And if you have a lot of legacy infrastructure, maybe now's the time, because with everybody working anywhere and customers conducting commerce anywhere, it's really important to be much more flexible. So, I'd say that many established brands have learned really good competitive concepts and ideas from those that were born in the cloud and more digital first. But there's also things, by the way, that digital first companies can learn from legacy companies. I mean, I think it is learning both ways.
Let's talk about your book, Growth IQ. It has become a Wall Street Journal bestseller and has been translated into 7 other languages. Why did you want to put pen to paper and develop Growth IQ?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. So, I am a salesperson at heart who ran marketing and customer service. And then I played an academic for 10 years when I worked at Gartner. And now I'm sort of back in the front lines because I missed being in front of customers in a more engaged way. And I had been getting whispers along the way of people saying, you really should write a book. You really should write a book. You really should write a book. And I'm not a writer in that way. I'm a storyteller. I'm a verbal storyteller. I speak at keynotes. I speak in front of people in rooms. And so for me to put my thoughts, my storytelling style, and my personality on paper was very intimidating for me. But I was having a random conversation backstage at an event in Boston, and the keynotes were Brene Brown, Malala, Chelsea Clinton, Seth Godin, and myself. And so
no pressure.
No pressure, right? And so I'd known Seth for a very long time. So Seth and I were sitting down talking, and he looked me dead center in the eye, and he literally said, "Look, what you're doing is interesting, and it's good, but you're great. You're great, Tiffani. You need to write a book, and you need to take a swing at the fence. You need to say, if you want to be a Thinkers 50 and you want to put out really compelling content, how can you do that more at scale? Because you can't just keep traveling and traveling, as you mentioned, 6 continents, and Antarctica was definitely on the list, right? But I've given a keynote with the president of Iceland, if that counts. I was in the middle of nowhere, right, up in Iceland last year. But it was, how do I scale it? And when Seth said that to me, I really took it to heart. And he is the cover quote on my book. He's been a supporter of mine for a very long time. But I then had to try to stay true to who I am as a speaker. And what I've heard so far, at least from people who have read the book, that they could hear me writing the book or saying the paragraph. I also had to do it via Audible too, so you can listen to me say it. But I wanted to write the book I would want to read. And so it has a very different feel than a classic, very heavy academic, covered research intensive book. I wanted to tell stories to tell the story. So that was the genesis of how the book came to be. But it was a painful, exhilarating, humbling, exciting, scary process. But it's been great to see her kind of go around the world. And now it's in 9 languages. So we've got 2 more that have launched. So it's even better.
Fantastic. Well, it's the right approach, right? You got to make it fun for people to read, or else what are you doing, really? Let me ask you, during your career, one of the things I find really amazing about you is you were able to popularize a few concepts such as reading the tea leaves and bimodal computing, which you mentioned earlier. And you go in grasping what can be really quite complex strategies and turn them into digestible concepts. How'd you go about doing that?
Yeah, and that is the heart of, I was joking when I said, I'm a classic salesperson who's, was an individual quota-bearing sales rep and became a leader and then ran marketing and ran sales. And as you mentioned, I was a channel chief and all of that stuff. That's what I'm really good at. When I became an academic, I'm like, I don't have my MBA. I kind of just made it out of a state school very quickly. That wasn't really my forte, if you get my drift, right? School wasn't really my thing. So when I first got to Gartner, I had to figure out, how can I add value? And I learned my superpower, which was I would consume a lot of research from Gartner from a lot of people, right? The hype cycles, the quadrants, the trends, and I would consume it and then say, okay, what does that tell me? How could I make this content and this research digestible for someone who was a sales leader or a marketing leader or a channel leader or a customer service leader or someone who was, focused on strategy? They don't want to know the speeds and feeds of the technology. They want to understand the outcome and the business value and the job that would be done. Once I learned my superpower, it was probably year 4 in the 10-year tenure, all of a sudden my perceived value in the market started to increase. And I'm not saying this from my point of view. I would get feedback from clients that I would help shape things, or they didn't really think about it that way, or et cetera. And so I took feedback from them to help me understand what was my superpower. And once they started to communicate to me how much they valued that, I doubled down, and I doubled down hard. And then reading the tea leaves kind of came to fruition. And that became sort of the standard of my presentation, right? Of reading the tea leaves of what are the analysts saying, what are customers saying, and now what does that mean to you? And I almost want to say that was the framework for the book. Like, here are all the trends that are coming. What does it mean to you? And I try to do that even now today in my role at Salesforce. It's taking a lot of trends and a lot of conversations I'm having on a global basis. Like, this morning I was doing something very, very early for TV. And then tonight at 8 o'clock, I'm doing something Pacific time, I'm doing something for India. And so it's having these conversations on a global basis and understanding that it's pretty similar regardless of where you go. Yeah. And so everyone thinks they're unique, but I have to kind of cut through the noise and make them feel like, wait a second, we're not in this alone. And maybe we can learn something from that other point of view. And once I sort of found that, I hang on to that every day as something that I was blessed to learn, I was really good at. And then it created a path for me to get to the Thinkers 50 and to write the book.
So I want to bring up another point that you started promoting way before they even had a customer experience officer. That job was created. You gave the example of being at a conference and skipping the free coffee provided to all attendees to stand in line at a Starbucks. What made you, how did you see that evolve at the time, and how has the experience been applied to sales in general and in IT?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to be part of the team at Gartner that came up with the prediction that the chief marketing officer was going to spend more on tech than the CIO. The day that prediction came out, the world was on fire. But what happened was many big providers, Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, and Salesforce, and Adobe, all pivoted and started to acquire companies to take advantage of this new spend that was happening at the CMO layer as it related to technology, not just like search engine optimization and ads and marketing, but really spending it on design architects and data scientists and IT service management and the technology that was actually going to power a lot of what they were doing. And so once that happened, we parlayed that into saying customer experience is going to be the next battleground from a brand perspective, that a good enough product won't cut it if you don't have a strong enough experience. And so we were using customer experience as the new battleground. And the example I gave was actually 3 images. And the first image was coffee beans, which is sold for pennies on the dollar. The second image was just a regular cup of coffee. So you go, look, the coffee bean is the product. The job to be done is I want to wake up in the morning. The option is you can have a cup of coffee. That's the product. And so you've gone from literally 8 cents to $1. The next image was a Starbucks cup. Still a cup, still beans, but now you're going to pay $5. Not only are you going to pay $5, but you, at the conference we were talking about, it was a Microsoft conference in the Verizon Center in DC in front of 16,000 people. And I'm on this little stage giving this presentation.
I think you went ahead of Clinton, if I'm not mistaken.
I actually went ahead of Satya's very first presentation in front of the Microsoft partner community. And before me was a gentleman by the name of Tony Profit, who now also works at Salesforce. So it's a very small world. Yeah. But in that presentation, I said, look, there's free coffee as soon as you walk out of this conference hall, but downstairs there was a Starbucks. People walked right past the free coffee, down the escalator, and stood in line like 50 deep to spend $5. So what I was trying to say to the managed service providers and the partners that don't sell the beans, that you have to sell the experience, because the dollar difference between the $1 or $5 has everything to do with the experience of an app, the way you order, the way you stand in line. We've all been trained to say the size of the cup first, and then what you want in it, and then the milk, and then the whatever you want,
so
right?
True.
Yeah, that has to do with the experience. So now I use the sort of Uber example normally when I'm in front of people, and I say, how many of you remember what you spent on your last Uber ride? And you know, or I say, how many of you have caught an Uber in the last 30 days? Everyone's hands go up. I say, leave your hands up. How many of you remember what you paid? About 85% of the hands go down, if not 90%. And I don't care if it's 10 people or 10,000. And then I'll say, okay, put your hands all back up if you've caught an Uber. How many of you remember if the car was smelly, the driver drove fast, the music was loud, they were too talkative? Everyone's hands stood up. So that means that you don't remember the price, but I sure do remember what the experience was in the back of that Uber. And that's that coffee experience. And we pay surge pricing on Uber.
That's
Stand
right.
on the street corner while it's snowing, waiting for an Uber when there's a taxi right there because of the experience, and we will spend more money. So, you know, that was really those two things, the prediction about the CMO and then talking about customer experience becoming the new battleground. I had to, once again, to your previous question, turn that into a story of how do I say this in a way that everyone goes, yep, got it, you know, and that was the way I could do it.
So you've been on a lot of women empowerment panels and events, and you spoke at the one I mentioned earlier, but you were the channel chief of Gateway. What was it like being a female channel chief back in the early days, and what did you learn from it?
So I didn't know what a channel chief was. And, you know, when I first started selling technology, literally I was selling litigation software. It was called Concordance, and it's since long been purchased by LexisNexis and gone on to an entirely new lifetimes. This was a long time ago. It was in 1996, I think. And I was the only sales rep, and I was calling 100 people a day, and 10 people call me back, and I was reading law, technology, product news. And I flipped to this page and it said, we are your value-added reseller. I'm like, what is that? Like, I don't know what a VAR is. Like, what is that? And so I called that company. I said, what do you do? Oh, well, we represent products for other guys. And I go like, oh, wait a second. How do you represent our product? So I stood up this, you know, I don't even want to call it a reseller program. It was something. And that was my first experience in developing. And we went from selling me individually, like 100,000 a month, to selling, you know, $1 million a month. I then moved on to, you know, a larger systems integrator, and then a distributor. Then I was at a telco. Then I ended up at a hosting company. So I got more and more experience at the power of the channel. But along the way, there were very few women, if you will. There was Allison Watson, who ran Microsoft's. There was Allison Seelinger, who ran Symantec. There was Julie Parrish, who ran. There was Anne, who ran Rico. There was, I'm trying to go in my memory bank of people. It doesn't really matter. But there was a handful. But one of the channel leaders at the time was only running North America for a company called Cisco. And his name was Chuck Robbins, who now happens to be the CEO of Cisco.
The CEO.
So, you know, I was at a pretty powerful table. You know, it was the executives who were running indirect programs for HP, Microsoft, Symantec, Rico, Xerox, Compaq. I'm really going to date myself. You know, there was a handful, McAfee, there was a bunch in the room. And I was way out of my league. But what was really awesome about it was all of those channel chiefs were willing to help me and advise me. Two in particular, Frank Vitigliano, who was running global channels for IBM, and Kevin Gilroy, who at the time was running global channels for HP and was instrumental in the acquisition for Carly of Compaq into HP. And those two gentlemen really helped. And so did Allison Watson, and so did Allison Seelinger. And so they kind of helped prop me up. And CRN Magazine did their very first channel chiefs list in 2001, I think. And had I been better prepared, I just found it. I'm cleaning out my garage. I found the plaque the first time I made the list. I almost want to run and come back, but
we'll superimpose it in the final product.
So it was 6 to watch.
6 to watch?
Yeah, 6 to watch. And so I got named by Heather Clancy to the 6 to watch on the, it might have been VAR Business at the time, the VAR Business channel chiefs list. That totally changed the trajectory of my career. So, you know, it was, you know, other channel chiefs who saw I was up and coming and I was hungry to learn. It was sort of the de facto publication at the time in the US that put me on the radar and put me on the map. And all of a sudden I had a seat at a table that was one that, I wouldn't change for anything. So I feel like, it's about opportunity, but it's also about finding those champions that will not mentor you, but if you have a question, I can still call Kevin today. I can still call Frank. He's the CEO of GTDC. Kevin has his own consulting business. So at the end of the day, I've established relationships that for 20 years have served my career. And that's the one thing I'd leave you, if you're looking to further your career or learn continuously, to find those champions that you can see who you aspire to be. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, I was one of the very first women, but I was not the first. And there were many before, there was a handful before me who really made it happen.
Yeah, that's a great story. But speaking of empowerment, have we improved since that time, since 20 years, in terms of diversity, in your opinion?
So, where I always get a little stuck is I attend a lot of events on women in tech. And then, and you can get a couple thousand women, there's one that CRN puts on, Women in the Channel, that gets 4,000 or 5,000 people in New York, usually once a year. Most of those people are channel program managers or marketing managers or sales managers. They aren't necessarily the chiefs, if you will, or they're the chief, but they're not the global chief. And so, I feel like in the strategy setting, not just in the execution side of it or in the relationship side of it, I feel like we need more diversity, period. Because it isn't just about women, it's about people of color, it's about people with disabilities, it's about people who don't have opportunities. So, I think that we're now having the right conversations, I think, to really shore up, diversity as a huge topic. And, I often hear, I want to get people who are right for the job, not just because they fall under some category.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, and here's what I would say back to that. This is about the opportunity. So if you are hiring and you have 5 people who all look the same, it means you're not giving an opportunity, or they're not applying, which means you need to reach out and find a way to get them in the mix. So now you have 5 that are diverse. Now the right person gets the job. Then it doesn't matter. But if you only have a group that looks all the same, then are you really giving someone the opportunity? Because they might be the best for the job, but they're not even being considered because their resume doesn't make it to the final list. They're not even applying because they don't even know about you. And so you have to work hard to get people to want to work at your brand, but then you need to give them the opportunity. And by the way, if they're not the best person for the job, they're not the best person for the job. But if you only have, 5 people to pick from and they all look the same, is that really opportunity? And so I think it's about forcing the hand of having diversity in the first place, then picking the right person for the job.
Yeah, no, definitely something to ponder. You mentioned earlier about the prediction about the chief marketing officer spending more on IT than the CIO. That was back in 2013, and something that you authored, The Future of IT Sales. I remember writing an article on that. I want to ask you, that was 7 years ago. What's in store for all of us in 2027, 7 years from now? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but
So I would say this. I would say I don't think we're ever going to go back to the way that it was. Mm-hmm. So now the question is, what do we want to make the future look like in 2027? What can we do for the things that we've been talking about? Continue to digitally transform, take care of our people, make it about work from anywhere, continue to automate and optimize the people and process side to remove friction for customers. Then we have all this new technology, whether it's virtual reality and 3D printing and drones and everything that can compress supply chains. It's really about just kind of reimagining and imagining the art of the possible. And so I feel like we're at a stage right now where we can write what 2027 is going to look like. And so I hope you wouldn't want it to go back to the way that it was. It's how do we learn from that time and then take what we've learned now and really apply it. And so I often use the example of bandwidth. And there's 19 or 20 million people in the US who still don't have access to high-speed internet. Yet we're telling everyone to educate from home, do healthcare from home, connect with people from home, but they don't have high speed internet. And, there's still hundreds of millions of people who are not online at all. And so 5G coming in and other places like the non-online coming online is huge numbers. The unbanked that have never had access to banking, getting banked. And so how do we just use education and technology to become a great equalizer, and to quote my CEO, Mark Benioff, and make business the greatest platform for change? So how do we sort of rally our companies around a bigger vision, lean into our values? What do we stand for? And then what kind of company do we want to be to support our people, the communities, and the broader shareholders that we serve? And I know that's a lot of buzzwords and a lot of things, but it's about really reflecting and saying, especially in the technology industry, we are powering this change, and it's our responsibility to make sure we do it in an even and equal way.
So my final question is a real personal one. You and I, we got to know each other by basically being on the road. We would go basically everywhere there's a conference, and this year, not so much, obviously, but has it been tough on you not being able to spread your wisdom at conferences and other events? And do you think the conference and the convention will ever come back?
I hope so. So last year I flew 375,000 miles, or 600,000 plus kilometers, depending on where you are in the world.
Sure.
Across 6 continents, gave 100 keynotes. All the fly time was my thinking time. So I miss my thinking time. That's one big one for me, because I just don't have time to think. The second is sort of the interactions with people, these random conversations I have with someone in the coffee line at Starbucks or in the Uber line, or waiting to get into a conference or sitting in the green room, that I'm stimulated to learn something new every single day. So I'm having to proactively reach out to learn and do things that I normally would just get by the day-to-day of my life. And then just, I'm an extrovert, the isolation, if you will, away from, the humans like yourself that I get to see at all the trade shows. I feel like, I miss my friends. So some days are better than others, but, I would say that now that I'm not traveling on an airplane, I don't know how this is possible. I'm actually busier because, as I mentioned, I'm doing 2 to 3 to 4 a day, and for different parts of the world. So where I used to do 1 every 2 days, I'd fly, I'd give it, I'd fly back, be home a day, I'd fly, I'd do whatever I'm doing, I'd fly back, I'd go internationally, I'd be a week. I might do 2 or 3 in a week. I'm doing 2 or 3 a day. And now there's 14 hours in the day. And so, I've had to get really careful around burnout, and just feeling like I've got nothing left to give. So now I'm doing no meeting Thursdays, and every other Friday I'm taking off, and, trying to really give myself that time to think and breathe. But, I am optimistic, right, that we are going to turn the corner on at least learning how to possibly live with this and not have it be that we just can't get back together anytime soon. But we have to do so safely. Like, ultimately, we need to make sure that we do it that way. So I would love to see it come back early next year. I would love to see it come back in 2021, period. But hopefully it comes back sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure. I hope we're on the same wavelength there. All out of questions. Anything you want to add that you felt I didn't cover in any of my questions?
No, I would just say that, it's always a pleasure to see you and to spend time with you and have these conversations. You've been one of the champions for my career as well. You wrote about me very early. You always attended my sessions. So I appreciate you, my friend. I'm grateful for all that you've done to help me over the years. So it's nice to be here with you today.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I appreciate you too. Where can people find your book, Growth IQ, and where can people follow you on social media?
So you can buy Growth IQ on Amazon, or barnesandnoble.com, or any of your online bookstores. It's in Korean, Polish, Vietnamese, Portuguese, Spanish, Simple Chinese, Mandarin.
We're missing Italian, Tiffani. Come on.
I'm well aware. So Italian and French are the two I keep going like, what's going on with my people? But haven't done it yet. So you can go and do that. I have it on Audible as well. It's also Kindle. You can follow me on social. I'm really active on Twitter. It's at Tiffani_Bova. I'm also very, very active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So I try to push out as much content as I can, and I try to aggregate a lot of it. So if there's things that you see that I put out and you have a question, or more importantly you don't agree, I always love to hear those comments as well, because it helps shape what I say and what I do. So that's how you can find me.
Fantastic. Again, Tiffani, thank you very much for your time today. Amazing insights, amazing stories. Thanks for sharing. There you have it from Tiffani Bova, the author of Growth IQ and the Global Customer Growth Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce. That's it for me, Paolo Nibletto, signing off for the Jolera interview series. Until next time, so long.
Bye, everybody.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.